Here we go. So we're going to continue with our subject number 4, which is Mysticism East and West. Now, last time what we did was we did some poetry with Emerson and, with Whitman and Emily Dickinson. But we juxtaposed that with Ramanujan, a mathematician who is, I basically view Ramanujan as having done 21st century math in the 20th century. And it's only in this century that we'll figure out what to do with what he was doing. In fact, there's a quote by his mentor, G.H. Hardy. Hardy said that the things that Ramanujan wrote down were just so incredible, they had to be true, because no one could have possibly had the imagination to figure out what these things were.
Piece of paper to fax to the doctor's office tomorrow.
So anyway, so I've got some other mathematicians. I'll try and give you some idea of what they do. And they both walk into what I'll call the area of mysticism. And it's just trying to show that there's a growing recognition, as I said, in physics and in math and other areas of science, that there's some unifying principles underneath everything that are just now coming into focus. We're not there yet, but you'll see what they are as we get there. So let me go to this, and I will go to share screen. Here we go. And let me get rid of this thing. So this is again an updated version of what we did last year. So what we have here is a bunch of topics that make this up. We've broken some out that are not even listed here. They're standalone. Last time we dealt with art as a spiritual endeavor. So this time we're going to deal with kind of everything else that you see there. But as you'll see, it's going to be quite different than last year. So I'm just going to skip through. This is all what we did. Here's the poem Mine by Jory Graham. And here's this poem by Mary Oliver. And finally, we get up to where we're going to start here. So a lot of this class where we started this up was, there was a book written in 1974, 75 called the Tao of Physics. And that was arguing that physics had hit the wall and that they needed some new ideas, and that the ideas might come out of Eastern thought.
Sorry, thought I could do it.
And so this book was written just at that point in time, and also just at that point in time, though, was when what we've seen earlier was called the Standard Model came into popularity in physics, and it's still there today. It's 50 years old. It works perfectly fine. Everyone knows that it's incomplete, but it walked away from doing anything with the drawing on any of these ideas out of the East. We've seen David Bohm, an incredible physicist who just basically spent the last years of his life with a number of Eastern mystics, trying to understand what it was they were doing, so that he could end up going back and trying to flesh out what he thought was needed in modern physics. And he passed on before he was able to do this. But the book is still in print, and it was reviewed by a chap at Columbia University, Peter Woit, who is very active. He wrote a book on, it's called Not Even Wrong, which we saw mentioned. So he's arguing that string theory is so screwed up it's so bad that it's not even wrong. That's the ultimate insult you can come up with in physics. To say this is, you don't say it's stupid, you say it's so bad it's not even wrong. In other words,
Say
ignore
where
it.
that comes from.
It comes from Wolfgang Pauli, who did that. He blew a lot of people away whose ideas weren't as well thought through as they should have been.
And he's the guy who had the something like 30-year correspondence with Carl Jung.
Right, which we are going to come back to. So the thing about the book, it makes this argument for looking to the East for these new ideas, and yet there's been some additions to the book, but Capra, Fritjof Capra, the author, really hasn't done anything to update the physics, even though there's been changes in physics throughout this last 50 years. It's still in print. You can find it. There's no problem buying one on Amazon and so forth. So we're going to argue that there really is something there, irrespective of what Peter Woit thinks, and we'll come to that. There was another book that came out at this because the first one was so popular. This drove the publishers to ask people to write another book like this that they could sell. So they have two of them to sell. And this was called The Dancing Woolly Masters, which again makes the same sort of arguments as the Tao of Physics. But what we're going to focus on here is something out of mathematics called the Langlands program. And this was promulgated by Robert Langlands in the 1967 to 1970 timeframe. So it's already 50 years old, okay? But it was an attempt to unify mathematics, much and drawing on ideas that were, to put it mildly, at the time, people thought this is the craziest thing they've ever seen. But there's more mathematicians working on this now than probably in any other area in math, for whatever that's worth. And it leads to a lot of really interesting things that are probably going to be useful in physics. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the share screen, and I'm going to play a little video, which I think does a nice job of getting these ideas across. And so here we go. This is a brief introduction to the Langlands program.
Some mathematicians are immortalized by conjecture, some by a theorem. But of the great mathematicians, only Robert Langlands is immortalized by a program. The Langlands program is a project that aims to show deep connections between two very different mathematical fields, harmonic analysis and number theory. Since Langlands in 1967 first suggested these deep connections, hundreds of the world's best mathematicians have made it their lives' work to prove his conjectures. In fact, no other project in modern mathematics has as wide a scope, has produced so...
This is the world's first reusable cotton swab. It
We got an
removes up to
ad.
5
Hold
times
on.
more excessive wax.
Oh my
with
God, that
many
was-
deep results and has enlisted the help of so many first-class mathematicians. The Langlands program seeks to establish connections between harmonic analysis, a world of waves, curves, symmetries, and geometry, and number theory, a world of numbers, equations, and their stubborn idiosyncrasies, two different worlds with different mathematical languages and different histories. I'm going to sketch out what harmonic analysis is, what number theory is, and one way that the Langlands program predicts their connections. Let's start with harmonic analysis. It can be thought of in very approximate and general terms as the study of periodic waves. The best known periodic wave is the sine wave, which consists of a peak and a trough repeating again and again. The sine wave is the most basic type of periodic wave, and by adding sine waves together, we can construct all other periodic waves. This Wrigley wave, for example, is the sound wave made by a flute playing the note A. And these are the sine waves that, when added together, make that sound wave of the flute playing the A. Each of these sine waves are called the harmonics of the A, which is why the field of study of periodic waves is called harmonic analysis. Within the field of harmonic analysis is a mathematical concept called an automorphic form. Automorphic forms are a generalization of the idea of periodic waves expressed using a more geometrical language, one which investigates the properties of shapes like this one. In very general terms, the periodic wave is the same in each of the shaded areas, as illustrated here, and in this universe, automorphic forms play the role of the sine wave, the building blocks of the more complicated wave. Robert Langland's early work on automorphic forms was the beginning of what would become the Langlands program. Okay, that's harmonic analysis. Now to number theory, the field to which the Langlands program predicts that harmonic analysis has unexpected connections. Number theory is the study of numbers, even numbers, square numbers, prime numbers. And one important topic within number theory is how to solve polynomial equations. That's equations where the exponents are positive whole numbers. Essentially, these are the equations that we are introduced to at school. Like this one, x squared plus x plus 1 equals 0. Now, what are the solutions to this equation? I'll save you the trouble. The solutions are minus a half plus the square root of minus 3 over 2 and minus a half minus the square root of minus 3 over 2. They look similar. The first part in both cases is minus a half, and the second is either plus or minus the square root of minus 3 over 2. In other words, they display a symmetry. You just flip the sign from plus to minus or from minus to plus to get from one to the other. In the early 19th century, the French mathematician Évariste Galois studied the symmetries between solutions of polynomial equations, and the table of these symmetrical relations is now called a Galois group. And it's the Galois group, which is the area of number theory that is mentioned in the citation for Robert Langland's 2018 Abel Prize. Let's look at the citation again. It says, the Langlands program predicts the existence of a tight web of connections between automorphic forms and Galois groups. As we saw, automorphic forms come from harmonic analysis, the world of waves, and Galois groups from number theory, the world of numbers. Let's now look at the nature of these connections. One concept crucial to Langland's ideas is modular arithmetic, a way of doing arithmetic with a fixed set of consecutive numbers, such that when you can't be on the top, you've got to start from 0 again. And we use modular arithmetic every day whenever we tell the time. We look at the clock. Usually, 11 plus 5 is 16. But 11 plus 5 in the 12-hour clock is not 16, because there is no 16 in the 12-hour clock. We know that 11 plus 5, or 11 o'clock plus 5 hours, is 4 o'clock, it's 4. Since once you hit the 12, you've got to start from 0 all over again. Now, in his Disquisitiones Arithmeticae from 1801, the German mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss established a theory of modular arithmetic and presented as its fundamental theorem the law of quadratic reciprocity, which is about whether or not quadratic equations can be solved using modular arithmetic. For example, can we solve the equation we were looking at before, x squared plus x plus 1 using equal 0 using modular arithmetic? Well, let's say we consider modular arithmetic with a modulus of 3, meaning we're only using for 3 numbers 0, 1, and 2, then we can solve it, since when x is 1, we get 1 squared plus 1 plus 1, which is 3, but this is the same as 0 when the modulus is 3. Since Gauss, mathematicians have been interested in how the solvability of certain types of equation depends on the modulus, and how this relates to the Galois groups of these equations. That's the table of symmetries of the solutions. The program predicts connections between Galois groups in number theory and automorphic forms in harmonic analysis. One connection is revealed by considering a type of polynomial equation called an elliptic curve. Here's an example of an elliptic curve. If you plot this equation on a graph, this is what it looks like. But if instead you try to find the number of solutions that the equation has for every modulus, when the modulus is a prime number, that's the numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, which are those numbers only divisible by themselves in 1, you will generate a sequence of numbers. The sequence of numbers, however, can also be generated in the world of automorphic forms. That's the world, remember, of shapes like this one. The Langlands program is exciting for mathematicians because it bridges apparently unrelated disciplines, revealing a deeper structure underlying all mathematics and providing new ways to solve intractable problems. But it is also intoxicating because of the nature of the connections. Number theory is an area where numbers often appear with no predictable order, yet automorphic forms are full of smooth curves, regular patterns, and beautiful symmetries. As its depth and breadth has grown, the Langlands program is frequently described as a grand unified theory of mathematics.
So I'm,
All right, before you begin,
yeah,
would you be kind enough to explain that equation where 3 equals 0? I don't get that.
okay, when you do modular arithmetic, there's only, in that case, the modulus is 3. So there's only 3 numbers, the number 0, the number 1, and the number 2. So if I add, as you saw in the equation, 1 squared, which is 1, plus 1, plus 1, I get 3. But 3 isn't 0, 1, or 2. You just think of it as like your clock, okay? So I run around the clock, I go from 0 to 1, that's counting one of them, 1 to 2, that's the second one, and then 2 to back to 0, okay? And so that's why the 3 equals the 0 modulo and modulus 3.
And does 4 equal 1?
Yes. You understand it.
It's called modulus.
Modular arithmetic, and the modulus, we use it with our clocks. The clock is modulus 12.
It's kind of like base 12, isn't it?
It's different.
Okay.
Because you run around in a circle on this thing. But I'm just trying to get across when this was first proposed, basically everybody thought the guy's out of his mind. Okay, how could you possibly have any relationship between harmonic functions and numbers, number theory types of things? They're you know, on its surface, there's no relationship, and in fact, they're now discovering all kinds of relationships between these things, which is a tip-off that there's something even deeper there. And it's been extended to certain areas of mathematical physics as well right now. And is a huge area of activity in mathematics. It's like trying to find the periodic table in chemistry, the same sort of thing. People all of a sudden start to sense there's connections and order, and they go crazy to try and fill in the gaps.
Where does the word modulus come from in this context?
It's just that he mentioned it, that the mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss invented the term, trying to solve these equations, and instead of calling them of a modulus P, you'll always see the term P-adic, A-D-I-C. And he did that in 1801, and no one's changed it since, let alone me. I'm not changing it. So anyway, I forgot one thing. I mentioned that last time we had done some poetry, and then we had some discussion of mathematics. And we had an occasion here where we had this past week, last weekend, we had a Buddhist monk pass on, and I'm just going to put up here a poem that he wrote. This is, oops, I got to get out of this. Just a sec. his name is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he actually came to the United States. He was in Vietnam, and it was appalled by by what he saw happening there with the Americans coming into Vietnam, and he came to the United States.
Please call me by my true
Just a
name.
sec, hold on. And he met with Martin Luther King and argued to King that King should speak out against this unjust war that he saw happening there. So let me go back here. Here's the poem. And here it is.
Please call me by my true names. Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today, I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second, I am arriving. To be a bud on a spring branch. To be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest. To be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower. To be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that is alive. I am a mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river. And I am the bird that swoops down to swallow the mayfly. I am a frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond. And I am the grass snake that silently feeds itself on a frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself in the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once. So I can see that my joy and my pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so I can wake up, and the door of my heart could be left open, the door of compassion.
Okay, let me just stop this. He just passed on and is being remembered. So now we'll go back to our presentation.
Bart?
Yes.
You know, I found that very moving. What did he do? What was his was he a poet? Was that his
He was a monk. In Vietnam. At age 7, he decided he would become a monk. Okay, he was born, I think, in 1923. And when the United States started to send troops to aid the South Vietnamese government, he was appalled at how bad the United States was. They were killing all kinds of innocent people. And he spoke out against this in Vietnam. And then he went to the United States and gave a number of talks on this, but in particular, he met with Martin Luther King. And it was at that point that King started to speak out against the war in Vietnam. And then he just stayed at his monastery in Vietnam, and that's where he passed on. I think if he was born in 19,
Didn't he spend a lot of time in France, though? He was kind of an emissary to the West.
Yeah, and he actually went to Princeton. I think he has a degree from Princeton, which is where he learned English. So,
But he's always been.
but he's written a number of books you can look
Yeah.
up, and he's a very, I would say, gentle, kind person. I mean, Bruce, Nina, he's a monk. Were you aware of him? Anything you want to say? No.
I'd like to
No.
say that the level of compassion that he displays just totally blows my mind. It's quite something else.
Yeah, no, he was a wonderful person. And I think the poem there, gives you some idea of who he was. And that's why I meant to start the class with it, and obviously I didn't. So anyway.
Is there a lot of his poetry available? Because I agree with
Yeah,
Steve.
he's written poems and he's written books. Okay, if you go onto Amazon, you'll see a bunch of things there.
He was a spokesperson. He was an activist of sorts. I think he was comparable and, maybe a more humble kind of Dalai Lama, in that he was acting in a political context as a part of his spirituality.
But always with love and compassion.
Right. Trying not to be forceful, trying not to be judgmental, but still speaking the truth to power. And he was just bringing attention to the fact that these children running around in the minefields, were being napalmed.
Yeah, if you remember.
It was more of a war against civilians, but it's also the way that they were fighting the guerrilla war there. But that's what they had to work with. Then we were aware of for quite some time, I think until Cambodia, which was at the tail end.
Yeah.
So he was always working to raise awareness.
Yeah, if you remember in the 60s, the government of South Vietnam had several Buddhist monks that set themselves on fire and died to project their objection to the war. And it was, people in the United States they were of course very saddened that this happened, but they just couldn't understand that it was these monks were protesting just how bad this war is and what's going on. How could you possibly want to continue this war? Had no impact on Lyndon Johnson, but if you come from West Texas, not a lot of things are going to faze you. So anyway, how do we advance this thing? So the next thing we had down on our outline was running through meditation. And
well, wait, I think Stephen was in the middle of asking.
Yeah, Steve, did you had something else? Go ahead.
No, not really. There was one thing that went by too fast for me to remember his exact words, but when he was talking about this pirate and he said something like, and the pirate not yet ready, and I don't recall exactly what came after that, but basically, ready to be compassionate was what one way or another was what he was saying. I really find remarkable just his ability to express the misbehavior, if you will, as being in a place not yet ready to, to be different. I think that's quite an important concept.
Right. Oh, good point. Thank you. So,
Well, what I like about it is that it reminds us to have compassion for these people. Jesus would say, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." It's the same kind of compassion that they really are crying out for. It's harder to feel it for them, but is it different from the snake eating the frog? Or is it just the course of nature? I would say not. I would say there's something different, and that you always identify, if you have a heart, you always identify with the underdog. But there's something different about this gratuitous cruelty and violence, and also when it's so systemic.
Well, it's consciousness, isn't it?
And what he was bringing to Martin Luther King's attention was the racism behind it. That it was xenophobia, it was racism, it was classism, but it was okay to do that to these foreign people because they weren't, Western European and North American, white people, essentially. And that's how he approached King, and that's how King resonated with it. And of course, so many of the soldiers being forced to go over there happened to be African American.
right.
I personally struggle with the fact that I find a delineation between people who do bad things because they're in a place where they have not yet arrived at being ready to be better versus just abject evil incarnate. I don't know how to migrate the latter to the former. I've been struggling with trying to find a way to do that.
Something that will help if you are interested is that exercise that we were so blessed to have Barbara share with us at the Labyrinth Walk that we did, a Ho'oponopono. It's a forgiveness exercise, and you kind of enter this this space with whoever it is. That sometimes it's good to do it openly and just see who shows up, or sometimes you can do it specifically with somebody in mind. And I've done a lot of this. I first learned it from our minister of music at the church, Ed Thompson, and then learned it again with the band that has really put it on the map from Australia. And Janet and I both spent time with a lot of those teachers. There's a particular guru, and then she like has a school of gurus, and several of them made this album of chanting with it. And Barbara grew up with it. It's part of her culture. It's a way of entering into the oneness, and I think that's what he really did in the poem, if I may be so bold. is that he captured the oneness, and that we are.
I think he did too, but with Steve's questioning and the commentary that's going on, I guess a little bit of my own thinking. What strikes me is that there is consciousness, like there's behavior, there's unconscious behavior, and then there's conscious behavior. So if you get to somebody doing evil acts that's not conscious of the evilness of it, that's quite different than somebody being, as Steve, you were commenting, someone that's just evil. They're consciously aware of the evil that they're producing and doing it on purpose. But the snake consuming the frog is not evil because it's unconscious behavior. It's natural behavior.
Right.
And it strikes me that he was, even getting back to the pirate example, the pirate not being yet ready, he's not conscious of that behavior enough to know that it's evil. It's just his humanness in the world that you and I would judge to be bad and evil. But he's just acting out his unconscious behavior, that it's normal.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. For me, the big deal is trying to find a mechanism using your the way you express that of the person who is purposefully evil. Is that forgivable? You know, if someone behaves, in this horrible fashion, with it just kind of being unconsciously reflexive, or something in that realm, to me that is forgivable, and I can visit, as was expressed, as he's not ready, to be better. There's something in his emotional development that is disallowing him to find the compassion to be better. That I don't have any trouble visiting. It's the purposeful evil, that is either done just for the sake of being horrible or for personal benefit, without regard to what's going on for anyone else. I have great difficulty trying to migrate that behavior into the camp of the, doing it without understanding of what they're doing.
I would agree, but so you take that example of the person that is doing something consciously evil and continues to do that, and then one day they wake up and realize all that they've been doing consciously is being evil, and then they go and say, I can't do that, I need to forgive, I need to seek forgiveness and not act that way any longer. I mean, that then becomes sort of for me, the difficulty that you also face, which is somebody's been consciously evil for so long, and then suddenly they want to transition. And that becomes the hardest thing to forgive.
Well, for me, if there's sincerity there, I find less difficulty in the abstract doing it, in kind of the real world kind of thing, really is enormously difficult. But certainly on an intellectual level, if they sincerely have come to some realization of the harm that they've done, and feel a sense of contrition, I don't have a problem trying to visit where they are now. It's those people who never get there, never have any desire to go there. That's the place where I have a problem.
And I completely understand that. And my example is purely getting back to the pirate wakes up one day and has arrived and knows that what he's been doing is all bad and wrong.
I wanted to ask Barbara to chime in. As I recall, Barbara, there was an individual there in Hawaii who was very skilled at Ho'oponopono and was able to reach, I would say, hardened criminals.
Yes.
And do you want to talk about this?
I think that for him, he was so in tune to the belief that you didn't have to engage with people to understand them in a way through forgiveness. I just learned another piece of this that I'm struggling with right now, because I really find it kind of egoistic for someone to add to something as ancient as Ho'oponopono, but a professor has just added a fifth element to that, and it's a line that says, I forgive myself. I think that if that pirate had that ritual and added that line that I forgive myself, that he may come to realization further, quicker, because that line means that I really forgive the divine that's within me, and the divine's with all of us. I think we're missing a piece here in my mind is, we all behave and act in context. And it's contextual. If this pirate was raised in that kind of environment and that was the expectation, I don't really know that he would come to realization of it being a horrific thing too easily. It might be that, like my aunt would have to say to me, I can remove you from what's going on in your environment by learning this prayer and learning to forgive. It would be very difficult to understand what was happening with this man consciously, not consciously, but unconsciously within that environment. He may be acting in a way that he's taught to behave, or a way that's normal in that environment, and not ever connected with his unconscious or connected to the divine within to say, oh, wait a minute, back up. I can see that this may be what people do, but it's not in my soul. It's not what I want to do. I think it's a very complex answer and a complex question. It's got a lot of parts there. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
It does make sense to me, but let me pose a question. Is it not possible that the twin brother of that pirate gets up in the morning and says, I can't believe that my family and friends and everyone in my community is behaving in this atrocious manner? This is just totally unacceptable. Does that not happen, just because of the mores of that community? It strikes me that some people will just intrinsically have a sense of, for lack of a better word, right and wrong.
That's also a complex question, because I think that let me just answer it this way. If you see a baby, the baby knows nothing about being evil. They have to be taught evil. Does a person have the intrinsic capacity for change if he is inundated by this environment? One would want to think so, yes. Can they do that? Maybe without some divine intervention or some modeling for them to understand that, for somehow to bridge the unconscious and the conscious, the intuition that I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like what my family's doing. Is there another way for me? Is there another way for me to know compassion? Sometimes we have to see compassion in order to really know it. We can understand within ourselves that something's kind of wonky here, something's fuzzy, something doesn't feel good. But can we put a name to it? Can we transition into that without modeling or some divine inspiration? I don't know. I don't think anybody has an answer to that, quite frankly.
Or maybe it could be explained this way, where we see little videos of wild animals that are arch enemies, and then one's wounded and the other one will come and help it.
It's seen that behavior.
And
That's part of their.
but how do they know to help?
It's part of their evolution. Remember, the brain is wired for survival. Emotion
Right.
and all that comes later. So in an environment, you think about how a person survives, how a person is reinforced or punished and all that. That has a lot to do with the way they continue to behave. That's why I say it's a difficult question. But do I believe that the divine can inspire change? Can the divine say, okay, you're going to sleep tonight, but when you wake up in the morning, this is what you're going to believe. You're going to know about compassion. Absolutely, I do believe that. So to your answer, Steve, I think without having any exposure to compassion, I think it will take divine inspiration to change that.
Well, there's also the role of karma.
That's true.
And karma, I mean, when I think about karma, and my God, my son again. When I think of karma, I also see that it can be quite brutal, because it can take away the possibility of your own evolution. There are people who are born in situations where there will be a cyclical way of living with very little possibility to be able to get out. And if you are that pirate who's not ready, most likely in the next life, you too will be a pirate who will not be ready. So karma has something to do with it, and volition and intention in our work is extremely important. Because you can keep living the same dark karma for eternity, you know.
And I want to say for me, it's taken me some time, but at this point, I feel compassion for the pirate as well as the victim. The pirate is living with the terrible thing of what he's doing. That's terrible.
Nonetheless, there is no escape from it, because he's perpetuating the same behavior. And when you perpetuate the same behavior, then you've basically written down another lifetime.
Which is even more tragic.
Yeah. So
for everybody concerned, including him.
Yeah.
I believe he's suffering on some level.
Well, we all are, but
well, only if he's conscious of his behavior. And that's, I guess, where I disagree a little bit with you, Marjorie, because I would have compassion for him if he had any inkling, even no matter how small it was, that what he was doing was wrong. But if there is no idea in him that this might be wrong even, then he's not conscious of his behavior, and I don't know how he can be forgiven for that behavior other than the same way that you would forgive a snake for eating a frog, which is, it's just a matter of the way things are until they become conscious.
Or until he's ready, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, until he's ready. He's not
right.
It's karmic or.
But would you feel sorry? Would
he's
you
not
feel
ready.
compassion or sorrow for him if he was not ready?
Right.
I'd pipe in absolutely yes. I don't think condemning the pirate's behavior is mutually exclusive with being compassionate for the pirate. I will just speak on a personal note. If I run into somebody, a total stranger, who's being an absolute jerk, I might be very, very put off by this person and try to get away from them or whatever it is. But when I reflect on that person, I'm feeling a lot of compassion for that person, thinking that, boy, this guy must be having a really hard time, a hard life, a hard something or other to be behaving this way. He's got to be having a really bad time, because if he was having a good time, he would not behave that way, period. So
Yeah,
I have no trouble being compassionate.
That's a very good and convincing point. Thank you.
Right, right. But to get back to Thich Nhat Hanh's context, he was seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of American soldiers acting atrociously to innocent people in Vietnam. They didn't have, terrible childhoods. They were average, maybe some did, but it's not that far-fetched. It's not that far afield. It comes out in people. And my feeling is that for me, we have to forgive it. If we don't, that perpetuates it on the level of the unity. That we have to find it within ourselves to forgive that part of ourselves that can be a monster.
Right. That's a really good point, Marjorie. And Dr. Hugh Lynn, the psychologist you were talking about who worked in the prisons, that's exactly what he did. He didn't for a second, I believe, condone any of the atrocities that these people did. I mean, this is but he had the compassion in himself to use Ho'oponopono to heal them and use the inspiration from the divine in order to heal these people. And also, throughout this process, he was able to heal those things in himself that were probably extremely less than what he was seeing or what he was looking at, but still there. So we do make, like again, I say it's a very difficult place to be, but your question about how people, normal midstream people, can go to Vietnam and turn themselves around to do atrocious things. That's something I've been struggling with for 20 years. And it's just not an easy answer.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I just from personal anecdote, a high school classmate of mine went to Vietnam and was involved in several firefights and came back to a reunion, and the person was a shell. He was nothing at all like what I remembered from him in high school. And he said that he had a box in his closet at home with some ears that he'd taken off of Vietnamese. And he was just totally traumatized by the whole experience.
One of the newer theories, I was listening to a lecture last night on neuroscience, is that people who are exposed to dangerous situations, people who are exposed to or have atrocities modeled for them, become hyper aware. And this is really a change in the pattern of the brain in the amygdala and the hypothalamus, so that unless there's some mediation, movement, meditation, to name just two things besides therapy, those portions of the brains never return to baseline. So they're always kind of triggered. I mean, they're hyperactive, and a small trigger can produce this type of behavior. So if you can imagine being in Vietnam and being, for some people, forced to do this the first time, then seeing it over and over again, those areas of the brain are not going to be at baseline. That's one possibility.
Right.
And that's what happens. There was a really good documentary about the genocide that was still going on, as far as I know, in Darfur. I can't remember the name of it, but it was shown through our church. and they're called Janjaweed, the perpetrators of these atrocities. They set people on fire for the fun of it. You know, they just go through villages and rape and pillage and torture people for no real reason. I mean, is there ever a reason? But really gratuitously. And I noticed they had these incredible cheekbones. Their skin was incredibly taut. I swear it changed their biochemistry somehow to just, they rode around on horseback doing this, just running, you know, on these rampages to innocent people. There was a wonderful segment of an old woman beating like 3 of them off of her husband who they were setting on fire. And she was just beating them with this broom and screaming as if they were children and just saying, no, no, no. She was like beseeching their souls to connect in some way with what they were doing. And she did beat them off and got her husband out of the fire. I'm sure she hadn't given a moment's thought. She was on autopilot and she had the strength to do this. I've seen that same like facial distortion in lawyers. I'm sorry. I swear to God I have. And in courtrooms. And they're just doing the same kind of thing in a very westernized, they're wearing suits, very quote unquote civilized way. But it's the same kind of marauding, rampaging destruction of human life. So it's not as far away, I think, as we like to think.
I was in a jury one time in West Texas, and after it was over, I went by the lawyer and probably inappropriately asked him how he could do such things, how he could sit there and defend a man who willfully raped, and his face just shrunk, and it was kind of like he went like this and shook his head like it was a role he was playing or something, or maybe he'd become jaded to that. I don't know, but it was a very sad moment for me.
Sure.
But for me, in my own struggle of dealing with the evil for the first time in my life, I encountered it in my 50s. I always thought it was kind of a hypothetical possibility. I would think of the Nazis, but I think it's much more prevalent than we care to think. I was working with a guru at the time, and I said, well, but they're not even sorry. I could begin, as Stephen was saying, I could begin to, if I could understand it, or if they were sorry, but it's just so hard to do it without that. They're still doing what they're doing, How do I forgive them when they haven't even stopped yet? And she said, well, that's when it really counts. That's when it's on us to do that work. And that's what can change it on the unified field, is us doing that work to forgive them when they haven't stopped, they're not sorry, they haven't learned, they don't understand. And that was what brought me to that place of they know not what they do. That was the only way I could really come to terms with it. But that there's something incredibly wrong with them. There's some damage there. There's some scar or something that is making them this way. And it's a terrible way to be. I mean, their soul has got to be, shriveling up like this little piece of burnt bacon. So I just try to have compassion for that, for, the picture of Dorian Gray. On some level, they've got to feel it.
Okay,
If a psychopath, they don't feel it.
Right, right.
yeah. So I just had some placeholders in there from last time on meditation. I mean, Bruce, let's ask you. This is just a list I found someplace for different types of meditation, but they're all just different sorts of spins on you know, the act of meditation is what it is, and these are, you know, mindfulness versus spiritual versus focused versus transcendental. You know, is there really a difference there? You tell me.
In a sense, all those meditations are meditations for the practice of awareness. Like awareness is where your own mind sees directly what's really there, and that's the main key. I mean, you know, people who are so-called evil are simply blind and simply oblivious, and don't have awareness of their own mind or their own
Right.
a lot of things. Because in a sense, and from my own experience, is that compassion and love and compassion are the natural mind of all living beings. You know? So what's happening? Well, it's back to karma. Now, if you look at my understanding of the definition of karma is the kind of the momentum in the mind of volition based on ignorance. And this leaves a formation in the mind that is basically illusory. And that it accounts for the incredible blindness that people have. I mean, so really, in a sense, the key in Buddhism is to develop awareness so you can perceive directly with your own mind.
Right. Good.
Bruce, I have a question regarding that, and it has to do with I guess about volition and blindness. I mean, if you literally are speaking about a blind person, and that blind person inadvertently, you know, steps on your foot or bumps into something and it falls on your head, you know, and really hurts you, well, that blind person isn't volitionally trying to hurt you. Their blindness has resulted in your being hurt, but they're not actively trying to hurt you. So in my mind, that's very different than these people who purposefully hurt others. And when they're doing it specifically for personal gain, you know, that just adds a transactional aspect, you know, to it that in my mind makes it even worse. You know.
Yeah, but the thing is that all those formations of the mind are basically conditioned. Like in the end, there's no blame because it was in a sense a mistake, maybe 2 or 3 lifetimes. I mean, take when somebody kills somebody, there's in the mind in the next few lifetimes where they think rage is real, is important, and hate is reality. I mean, lots of people get lost in those kind of delusions, but they're still delusions. And there is, the mind is capable of transcending that through development of awareness. It's the only way through. There's no other way. I mean, punishing somebody or killing somebody for doing something wrong doesn't do anything, just makes it worse. So it's like transcending shall we say, difficult formations of the mind. I mean, I think everyone experiences as you get older, you find out things that have been really troubling you for most of your life are no longer really there or no longer capable of influencing your mind. This is the natural unfoldment of the mind. This is what it's capable of doing. It's capable of transcending anything over time. That's so, like, for example, karma, that my understanding of it is that if somebody kills somebody in a previous life, the next lifetime, it's very common for them to have rage and hate. But those formations of the mind, if they're neutral, in other words, if you don't do it again, the formation of the mind will eventually dissolve on its own in 5 lifetimes. So it's like for all the difficulties that many people have, they all have a cause and they all have an end. So you just have to become aware of that reality in your own mind.
Great.
I think it can be as difficult for us to feel compassion for these people as it is for them to feel compassion for anybody. But I think we're only expanding the pool of it on the planet, the more we can learn to pull it out of ourselves, even when we think
One of the
impossible.
one of the kind of awarenesses that counters that is you actually see kindness in everyone. Everyone has love and compassion and kindness in its own nature. When it's something else, it means it had a cause.
Right.
So that kind of like leaves you neutral, because there's no blame in a way. Like you have that kind of insight, and then so the mind understands in its own direct way that the real story is not what it appears at all. You know?
Yep, I'm just looking at the time, and I think what I'm going to do is just switch things around here to do something instead, which is going to bring out these points of compassion and evil and so forth. This is a brief biography of arguably the greatest mathematician in the 20th century, Alexander Grothendieck, and you'll see what I mean when you start to listen to the life that he lived and how he ended up at the end. So let's just give this a try. Oops, I got to start it first. Hold on.
Are you still recording?
Yeah, still recording.
Okay.
I have to get.
Just stop sharing that.
Did I? No, we're recording. Oh, sorry. I have to take this thing. I go here, here. Okay.
All around the world, tech companies are innovating and driving returns for investors. At Our Crowd, we analyze companies across the global private market, selecting those with the greatest growth potential, then bring them to you. For personalized medicine. Alexander Grothendieck was a 20th century mathematician who made wildly important contributions to topology, algebra, and logic, earning a Fields Medal in 1966. Amongst his many contributions to mathematics, he's most notable for being the leading figure in the construction of contemporary algebraic geometry, adding the following to its foundations: commutative and homological algebra, which studies algebraic structures in terms of their generators and relations; Sheaf theory, with a sheaf being a tool for systematically tracking locally defined data attached to the open sets of a topological space. And category theory, a general mathematical theory of structures and of systems of structures.
Sorry.
You clicked on the screen. Click back on this.
Grothendieck is considered by many to be the greatest mathematician of the 20th century. Grothendieck was born on March 28, 1928 in Berlin, Germany, to anarchist parents Alexander Sasha Shapiro and Joanna Hanke Grothendieck. To understand Grothendieck more, it's important to go a bit more in depth into his parents' backgrounds. Shapiro, referred to generally as Sasha, was a Russian man of Jewish heritage born in Novozhivkov, a town near the point where Russia and the Ukraine met. At age 15, he fought for the revolutionaries against the Russian czars, being caught in 1907 and sentenced to death with his fellow comrades. Due to his age, Sasha ended up just being given life imprisonment instead of being killed. He then spent 10 years in prison before escaping during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. After his escape, he continued to fight for the anarchists, being captured several times but always managing to escape. He actually lost his left arm on one of these occasions. Sasha ended up marrying a woman named Rachel and had a son with her named Dodek. Due to his anarchist ties and the increasing oppression on anarchists in Russia, he ultimately had to evade Russia in 1921 and ended up in Berlin, changing his name to Alexander Tanneroff, making a living as a street photographer. Joanna, generally referred to as Hanke, was a woman of Dutch origins born in Hamburg, Germany, who joined many left-wing groups, working as a journalist for a progressive paper called Der Pranger. She ended up marrying a journalist named Alfred Raditz, having a daughter in 1924 with him named Frode, referred to as Maidi. On a visit Hanke made to Berlin, she ended up meeting Sasha. The pair had an affair, which later resulted in the birth of Alexander Grothendieck, our focus of this video, as well as Hanke leaving Raditz to live with Sasha. The pair never married. From 1928 to 1933, Sasha, Hanke, Maidi, and Grothendieck lived in Berlin together. The family made money from owning and managing a photography studio, but needless to say, they lived in poverty. In 1933, with Hitler's takeover, fear struck Sasha due to his Jewish heritage, and he left for Paris in May of 1933. Hanke stayed in Berlin with Grothendieck and Maidi until December 1933, where she then joined Sasha in Paris. Before leaving, Hanke arranged for Grothendieck to live with a Lutheran pastor, Wilhelm Heydorn, and his wife Dagmar in Hamburg, and Maidi was put into an institution for mentally handicapped children in Berlin. Note that Maidi survived the war and eventually emigrated to the United States. While living with the Heydorns, Grothendieck attended elementary school and began studies at the local gymnasium. But in April 1939, these studies were cut short due to rising fear of Jewish persecution. The Heydorns felt they were in serious danger being a part of the Hitler resistance, so they located Grothendieck's parents in Paris and put him on a train to go join them. Grothendieck ended up spending the summer of 1939 in Nîmes with his mother. With the outbreak of World War II, Grothendieck and his parents were now in great danger even in France. There was a law passed on November 12, 1939 concerning undesirables, requiring Germans living in France to be sent to internment camps. Grothendieck and his mother were interned in the Hlyuklu camp near Mons, and Sasha was interned in Camp du Vernay. It's almost certain that Grothendieck and Hanke never saw Sasha again. While at Hlyuklu, Grothendieck was still allowed to get an education, and he did so at a school in Mons, about 3 miles from the camp, also receiving private tutoring. In August of 1942, Sasha was sent to Auschwitz, where he was assumably executed, and the Hlyuklu camp closed down. So Grothendieck and his mother ended up at the Gull camp near Pau, with Grothendieck managing to escape. He somehow made it to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, where he lived in a sheltered, hidden boarding home. Despite the home being mostly safe, Grothendieck would have to hide out in the woods every time authorities came looking for Jews, sometimes going days without food or water. Amongst all of this, Grothendieck was still able to get an education while in Chambon. Grothendieck attended Collège Sévenol, a secondary school founded in 1938 by anti-war activists. It was here that he became truly fascinated with mathematics. Receiving his baccalaureate in 1945, and with World War II now over, Grothendieck and Hanke moved to the village of Maissog, near Montpellier, where Grothendieck worked in the vineyards. Fortunately, Grothendieck was able to get a small scholarship to the University of Montpellier and began studying mathematics there. While at the University of Montpellier, Grothendieck had issues with the way some of the mathematics was presented. He already disliked the holes that his high school mathematics texts left, vowing to fill the gaps when he had the chance. And he found his professors at the university didn't help much in filling those gaps. Thus, much of the work was done on his own. One of his lecturers, Monsieur Soula, had expressed that Lebesgue had resolved the last outstanding problems in mathematics, but it would be too difficult to teach alone. Amazingly, this led Grothendieck to rediscover the general form of the Lebesgue integral, with almost nothing to go off of. He ended up spending 3 years at the University of Montpellier, and each year he grew more independent in his studies there. Per suggestion from Soula, Grothendieck went to go study mathematics in Paris in 1948. From 1948 to 1949, Grothendieck studied at the École Normale Supérieure, or ENS, with Henri Cartan, a 20th century mathematician who made large contributions to algebraic topology. Grothendieck attended a seminar instructed by Cartan, which covered algebraic topology and sheaf theory, and he encountered many notable mathematicians of the time in the seminar, including Jean Dieudonné, a 20th century French mathematician notable for his research in algebraic geometry and being a part of the Bourbaki group, Laurent Schwartz, a 20th century French mathematician who pioneered the theory of distributions, and André Weil, a 20th century French mathematician notable for his foundational contributions to number theory and algebraic geometry. Grothendieck apparently commented that though he was able to eventually understand everything being lectured, understanding didn't come to him as instantly as it seemed those around him at the ENS. With this slower understanding and general interest being in that of topological vector spaces, Cartan and Weil recommended Grothendieck move to the University of Nancy to continue his studies.
We are the new generation of Christian thought leaders.
Grothendieck moved to Nancy in 1949 with his mother. At the University of Nancy, he worked very hard to understand and solve problems in functional analysis, having very little books at his disposal and basically reconstructing things on his own. He also attended an active seminar that was held every Saturday that was mostly attended by professors. Impressed by Grothendieck's abilities, Dieudonné and Schwartz threw a series of unsolved problems at him, as a means of helping construct a general theory of duality for convex vector spaces. In less than a year of being thrown these problems, Grothendieck had solved them all, going on to solve many more problems in functional analysis with the techniques he had developed. On February 28, 1953, Grothendieck, advised by both Dieudonné and Schwartz, presented his doctoral thesis, Topological Tensor Products and Nuclear Spaces, leading to applications in physics and computer science. By this point, he was now the leading figure on topological vector spaces, with Dieudonné comparing his impact to that of Stefan Banach, a 20th century Polish mathematician who is notable for being the founder of modern functional analysis. After receiving his PhD, Grothendieck lectured and researched at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil from 1953 to 1955. Around 1955, he began working on sheaf theory and homological algebra, taking the theory of sheaves to a higher level of abstraction. In 1956, he moved to the University of Kansas, leaving a year later to work at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, or CNRS, which he'd been funded by since 1950, and he also became one of the members of the Bourbaki group. By 1957, Grothendieck had completely shifted gears towards algebraic geometry and homological algebra. His first discovery in algebraic geometry was a generalization of the Hirzebruch-Riemann-Roch theorem, which relates topological properties of complex algebraic curves to their algebraic structure. He proved this algebraically, and in doing so, came up with techniques that started the study of algebraic K-theory, which is concerned with the structure theory of projective modules and of their automorphism groups, and topological K-theory, which studies the topological properties of objects by associating them with rings. He also produced the Tohoku paper in 1957, published in the Tohoku Mathematical Journal, introducing abelian categories, removing the need to distinguish the cases of modules over a ring and sheaves of abelian groups over a topological space. In 1959, Grothendieck began his golden age after being offered a research position at the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques, or IHES, where he would spend the next 11 years of his life. During his golden age, Grothendieck established several unifying themes in algebraic geometry, number theory, topology, category theory, and complex analysis. To put it bluntly, it was an insanely prolific 11 years that Grothendieck had at the IHES. At this point, Grothendieck stopped publishing mathematics through the conventional route of journals, as the seminars were intense and productive enough that he attracted a wide enough audience to get his research exposed. To just list a bit of his remarkable contributions, during this time he introduced the theory of schemes, allowing for Weyls' conjectures to be solvable, the theory of topoi, a category theoretic generalization of point set topology, greatly influencing set theory and mathematical logic, and the algebraic definition of a fundamental group of a curve. His influence is also attributed with category theory becoming a separate mathematical discipline, though this was unintentional. It would probably take an entire video or two to go more in depth with his contributions, but let's at least discuss schemes. Within his research, Grothendieck began adopting the use of non-closed generic points, leading him to the theory of schemes. A scheme being a mathematical structure that expands the notion of an algebraic variety in many ways, such as taking into account multiplicities and allowing for varieties defined over any commutative ring. To note, an algebraic variety is a set of solutions of a system of polynomial equations. This theory provided a new, more flexible, and general foundation to algebraic geometry that is used to this day. And this theory was developed in detail between 1960 and 1967 by Grothendieck and Dieudonné, collected into the work Éléments de géométrie algébrique, or EGA. The EGA introduced a Tal and Elatic cohomology theory, which were used to prove the Weyl conjectures, produced in 1949, but unsolvable until the EGA. The conjectures essentially observed there was a connection between topological characteristics of a variety and Diophantine equations. Weyl realized a new cohomology theory was needed to prove this, but alas, there were no experts capable of producing this theory until Grothendieck. Pierre Deline, a Belgian mathematician who was one of Grothendieck's PhD students, completed the proofs for these conjectures in 1973. In 1966, Grothendieck received the Fields Medal for his contributions to algebraic geometry, homological algebra, and K-theory. But he did not collect the medal himself, instead having the director of the IHES, Leon Motchain, collect it for him. The International Congress of Mathematics was held in Moscow, Russia in August of 1966, and Grothendieck refused to travel there as a political protest. He had strong pacifist views, which led to him campaigning against military buildup in the 60s. Thus, Russia was on his anti-travel list. Grothendieck made no public statement about the reasons for not going, but declared himself a citizen of the world and requested U.S. citizenship. In December of 1967, Grothendieck visited North Vietnam, which was being bombed by the U.S. He started off his lectures at Hanoi University, but the bombing became too intense, so Grothendieck and the members of the university went to a secret location to finish them. Grothendieck described it as a remote forest hideout in a desperately poor country that was being bombed into the Stone Age. On May 25, 1970, Grothendieck put in his letter of resignation to the IHES after finding out the year prior that the university had been accepting military funding. Grothendieck rallied up most of the faculty to convince Motchain to stop accepting this funding, which they actually succeeded in doing, but when funds got tight, Motchain went back to accepting said funding. Grothendieck tried getting faculty to resign in protest after this fact was revealed, but he ended up being alone in this venture. Military funding was the primary reason for leaving, but Grothendieck had also been experiencing a so-called spiritual stagnation, which he had started to develop a few years before. Though he was still doing mathematics, he had abandoned it as his main focus, turning to political protest, as mentioned earlier. Despite how powerful his mathematical influences were, he ultimately had very little impact with his political campaigns. After leaving the IHES, Grothendieck over the next few years would distance himself more and more from the mathematical community, still producing mathematics for the rest of his life, but ending his standard career there. Nothing was ever stable for him 1970 onwards. From 1970 to 1972, he held a post at the Collège de France. From 1972 to 1973, he held an appointment at the Université Paris-Saclay. From 1973 to 1984, Grothendieck worked for the University of Montpellier. And from 1984 to 1988, he worked for the CNRS, but still had an association with the University of Montpellier. In 1988, Grothendieck formally retired and was also offered the Crawford Prize by the Royal Academy, which he declined, expressing that established mathematicians had no need for additional financial support. He went on to criticize the declining ethics of the scientific community, as well as expressing belief that there would be an unprecedented collapse of civilization before the end of the century. Lastly, he expressed that he regretted the inconvenience caused to the Royal Academy that his declining the prize may have caused. In 1991, Grothendieck ultimately disappeared with virtually no contact with friends, family, or anyone in his previous academic circle for the remainder of his life. He spent his time writing an extremely large work on physics and wrote a few philosophical meditations on subjects such as free choice and the existence of evil. Considering Grothendieck's early beginnings, it goes without saying he had a rather unconventional life. Grothendieck, as we know, became a refugee in France in 1939. Records of his nationality were destroyed in the fall of Germany in 1945, so he essentially became stateless. Refusing to apply for French citizenship after World War II ended, he traveled on a Nansen passport, or a stateless person's passport, for the majority of his life. His reasoning for not applying for French citizenship was that he did not want to be enlisted in the military. He eventually applied for citizenship in the early 80s, well past the exempt age for military service. As mentioned, while at the IAGS, Grothendieck became more passionate about his political activism. Shortly after putting in his resignation at the IAGS, Grothendieck made a political group called Survivre, later renamed to Survivre et Vivre, with two other mathematicians. Claude Chauvelet, a 20th century French mathematician who made important contributions to algebraic geometry, was one of the founders of the Bourbaki group, and Pierre Samuel, a 20th century French mathematician, notable for his work in commutative algebra and his applications to algebraic geometry. The group was dedicated to anti-war and ecological issues, criticizing what they felt to be the indiscriminate use of science and technology. The group was first formed in Montreal, but Grothendieck headed the Paris branch, being the main editor of their newsletter for 3 years. Grothendieck felt that the best form of organization for the Paris group would be a commune, which he opened in Châtenay-Malabry in 1972. The initial intention was for the warmth of a family environment and a meeting center, but the commune was actually complete chaos, with Grothendieck even having doubts about whether Survivre or commune life made sense. Despite the chaos, any talks that Grothendieck gave attracted the attention of sometimes 100 plus people. One day, after coming home to find people in the commune using some of his mathematical manuscripts as kindling for a bonfire, he decided it was time to move on. In less than a year of living on the commune, Grothendieck moved to Villecomte in 1973, staying there for the next 6 years. In Villecomte, his house was open to everyone, and he was remarked as looking cheerful and being extremely generous. The home he chose was the smallest, darkest, and most unpractical house he could have picked, being filled with fleas, having no garden or terrace, and looking more like a hideout than anything else. He had no electricity, working by the light of a petroleum lamp, and apparently he unlatched his front door and slept on that. When it came to food, he lived on produce from local communes or individual alternative farmers, with a typical diet being that of goat's milk, goat cheese, fresh vegetables, fruit, and rice. Many people frequented his house in the first few years, mostly those in Villecomte, but occasionally friends, family, and colleagues as well. Since he was working at the University of Montpellier, he did own a car to be able to get there, though it's claimed he was an incredibly bad driver with no one feeling safe getting in the car with him. It took him 9 tries to get his license. In July of 1979, Grothendieck moved from Villecomte to La Gartette, the home being a lonely retreat which he kept top secret, living there a year in almost complete isolation with no electricity nor running water in the home. Eventually, he received many visits, including from his 2 eldest children. From there, Grothendieck moved to Les Oumettes in the second half of 1980. Again, a secluded home, but this time had modern amenities. He lived there until ultimately taking off in 1991 for an even more isolated life. In total, Grothendieck had 5 children, spread amongst 3 different women. The first child was with his landlady Nancy, Aline Triquet. A woman much older than he, they had a passive affair leading to the birth of Sergei Grothendieck, largely being raised by Aline for the first 13 years of his life. The second woman whom Grothendieck had children with was Mireille Dufour, and the pair had 3 children together, Joanna, Alexander, and Matthew. Mireille was a few years older than Grothendieck and originally came from Normandy, having received secretarial training and working occasionally as an accountant. She was noted as being a strong and determined woman. Mireille spoke fluent Spanish and apparently had contact with Spanish anarchist networks, which is ultimately how she met Grothendieck, through these circles. Grothendieck's mother, whom Grothendieck had been living with in Nancy since 1949, died of tuberculosis in 1957, an ailment she'd contracted while in one of the internment camps. On her deathbed, she had Grothendieck promise that he'd break off his relationship with Aline and marry Mireille. So, Grothendieck did just that, and it's important to note that their marriage was not happy conventionally. Grothendieck ended up having many other lovers, even bringing them back to the family apartment. In 1972, Mireille couldn't bear to live in their home anymore and moved out to the suburbs of Paris, the pair officially divorcing in 1981. She only took their 2 sons, leaving Joanna with Grothendieck. Joanna lived with Grothendieck on the Châteauneuf commune, eventually having a 4-year affair with a boy she'd met there. Despite all the problems they had, Mireille moved close to Villecombe just before he moved again, as she felt that their son should be near their father, moving again when Grothendieck moved to La Gardette. The third and final woman Grothendieck had a child with was Justine Scalba, whom he'd met when traveling to the United States after receiving an invitation to work with SUNY Buffalo in New York State. There, for just a couple of months, he ended up giving a lecture at Rutgers University, where Justine was a PhD candidate. At the get-together after, Grothendieck spoke with her about his plans to give up mathematics and move to the countryside. Justine was intoxicated by this idea and gave up her studies to follow Grothendieck to Europe. Justine lived on the Châteauneuf commune with Grothendieck, where she was ultimately impregnated by him, giving birth to their son John on October 28, 1973. She lived with Grothendieck for a few months in Villecombe, but the conditions were too unsavory for Justine to raise a newborn there. Also commenting that Grothendieck would have rather scary breakdowns on occasion, one of which resulted in him screaming in German even though she did not understand German. Justine went back to live in Paris for a bit before moving back to the United States with John. During the 1980s, though he wasn't publishing, Grothendieck wrote thousands of pages of both mathematical and non-mathematical content. Between 1980 and 1981, he wrote The Long March Through Galois Theory, which was a 1,600-page handwritten manuscript that eventually led to Sketch of a Program, written in 1984. It described new ideas for studying moduli spaces of complex curves and was a proposal to the CNRS for long-term research. The CNRS turned down the proposal, but still offered him a special position which allowed him to stop teaching at the University of Montpellier. Though the CNRS turned the proposal down, the ideas introduced had a profound effect on research today, introducing descent d'enfant theory, where descent d'enfant is a type of graph embedding to study Riemann surfaces and provides combinatorial invariance for the action of the absolute Galois group of the rational numbers, and Annabelian geometry, which describes the way a fundamental group G of an algebraic variety V determines how V can be mapped into another object W under the assumption that G is strongly non-commutative. He never published this work himself, but it ended up being published in the 2-volume work Geometric Galois Actions in 1997, written by Leila Schneps, an American mathematician and fiction writer at the CNRS, her focus being in number theory, and Pierre Locek, a French mathematician working at the University of Paris and is notable for his work on Teichmuller theory. In 1986, Grothendieck wrote a 1,000-page autobiographical manuscript titled Codes et Semailles, in which he described his approach to mathematics and his experiences within the mathematical community. His view is that he was initially accepted with open arms, but progressively perceived academia to be governed by competition and status. He felt like his work was buried, along with feeling betrayed by former students and colleagues after leaving the community. After 1991, Grothendieck basically refused every human contact. with the exception of the brief correspondence he had with Schneps and Locek, who somehow found his location and became the last members of the mathematical establishment to come in contact with him. Grothendieck died on November 13th, 2014, at the age of 86, dying in a hospital in Saint-Giron, Ariège. From there, it was revealed that he had been living alone in a house in La Sège, Ariège, and that while he was alive, he was sustained food-wise by local villagers after they saw his attempt at living on a diet of dandelion soup. Well, there you have it, a glimpse into the life of the extraordinary Alexander Grothendieck. I'll end us on Grothendieck's obituary, written by algebraic geometers David Mumford and John Tate. Although mathematics became more and more abstract and general throughout the 20th century, it was Alexander Grothendieck who was the greatest master of this trend. His unique skill was to eliminate all unnecessary hypotheses and burrow into an area so deeply that its inner patterns on the most abstract level revealed themselves, and then, like a magician, show how the solution of old problems fell out in straightforward ways now that their real nature had been revealed. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.
So just a sec, let me just shut this down. So here you have a number of different threads here. We talked about, for example, Vietnam and war and so forth, and you saw here's someone who lived through it, who effectively had no citizenship anywhere, and there was no legal documents. He was, again, French. So you saw he had what, three women that he fathered children with, and many more women and so forth. And then you saw the mathematics side of him, of how they just touched on this, that Schwartz, when he was in Paris in 1949, 1950, Schwartz saw that Grothendieck was looking around for something to do. He was bored with his classes. So Schwartz had a set of 14 problems, and he said, here, take a look at these and maybe you'll find something that interests you. And so 3 months later, Schwartz got together with Grothendieck and said, well, which problem did you like? And he said, what are you talking about? I solved them all, which totally floored Schwartz. Any one of these was a doctoral dissertation. So then they started to figure out how smart he was. That Institute for Advanced Studies that was created in Paris was mirrored after the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, New Jersey. There was, that is, Grothendieck had no classes to teach. He simply was there to do research. And every day he would get up and be there in the lecture room at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there'd be a bunch of students, very high-powered mathematicians, that would be taking notes. And he would lecture, typically nonstop till, dinner time or into the evening. And then he'd go off to bed and he'd get recharged. And the next day he'd come back at 8 o'clock in the morning and start lecturing again. He'd be just inventing this math all along the way. And what you saw was, again, he would go after abstraction. They touched on this again and again, that modern math has gone toward greater and greater levels of abstraction. So most of the terms that they're using there, they're English language, but what in the world do they mean? There's some abstraction of some abstraction. What in the world was he doing? But that was who he was. And then he just was totally revolted by, as you saw, anything to do with the military, in part from his upbringing. And in his later years, up to 2014 when he died, he had a stint as a Buddhist, but then became a very devout Christian. And I have no idea what that meant for someone of that intellectual caliber, what in the world he was thinking that took him on that journey. But the end of this is we're going to contrast what he did, which I'll call continuous mathematics. That is the mathematics that we've seen come out with Newton, for example, developing calculus and things related to this. And then we're going to see the other extreme that happened after World War II, really due to computers, which is called discrete mathematics. And discrete mathematics is going to be at the other extreme, where you're going to be able to explain any problem you want to your 5-year-old, okay? The issue is not explaining the problem. You can understand the problem. The issue is, can you even solve it? And problems that look very innocuous, and I will give you one. It's a bicycle assembly problem, which you all will have to do. Is very easy to understand, and you'll find out that the results might surprise you, even though you can all do these things. So just a different note. But what Grothendieck was doing, they touched on it in the movie, the Bourbaki School of Mathematics. The French were very much into formalism and using this to clarify, and this sort of rigor of nailing down definitions and making sure that there were no leaps of logic anywhere was the hallmark of this Bourbaki school. There was no person named Bourbaki. It was just a name that they picked up that they all joined in with and published all of these books on the foundations of mathematics. And Grothendieck was one of the real drivers behind all this stuff. The Fields Medal that he got is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. There is no Nobel Prize for mathematics. And many other things that he did. The people just couldn't keep up with him. He was just so incredibly prolific in what he was doing and the things that he was inventing again and again. He described it as he had a searchlight, and he would shine the light on one area and then move the light over to another area. And this was how he just ran through year after year, nonstop, cranking out things. The things that he didn't publish, they just touched on. 1,600-page manuscript. I mean, that he didn't publish. He published a lot of other things, but this is not your normal person. And yet he's living on dandelion soup, and the villagers are just trying to scrape together enough food for him so that he can have some protein beyond the dandelions. So very, very much of a mystical person, and very much of his own person. And that was the thought I had with this. We had other things I wanted to cover, but with our discussion and everything else, I thought that was a good discussion. We'll just delay these other things till next week. Any other comments from anybody?
My comment is that that film seemed to be almost intolerably heavy on soap opera things about his wives and children and so on. One of the things that they touched upon was his going off into seclusion and writing some treatise on evil. That's what I would have liked to hear something about. And one of the in keeping with that, what we hear a lot about is, the quote, love mind, and everybody gravitating towards warm and fuzzy likes thoughts about that. What I never hear anything about is, the flip side of, well, is there an evil mind? And if so, what is that all about? And how does that relate, to the love mind? Is it a yin and yang thing, or what is it? I have a lot of curiosity there.
It's a good point, Steve. I just wanted to expose you to Grothendieck because, in a class like this, you might never run into him ever. But the thing is to go back and see now what is available. Because again, like I said, he was for the last 20 years of his life, he was initially Buddhist, and then he became a devout Christian. And with someone like that sort of intellectual horsepower and writing something on evil, what was the journey that he took to come there? I would like to understand that. You know, he was,
Maybe we can find
Yeah.
out what's going on with that manuscript and
Yeah.
if it hasn't been published.
yeah,
maybe
there's a
we
lot
can
of
do
things that are
something
now,
about it.
you know, surfacing that are self-published or whatever. And so, you know, again, he probably wrote it in French, so someone would have to translate it into English, but even today, that's no big deal. So, you know, we'll see what else we can find. I just, again, it was just, my thought was to just expose you to this. And here was this nice little YouTube video. And you could see what the life that he lived. It was just mind-boggling what he went. How could you escape from this concentration camp? You know, and you're probably 8 years old. Like, what's going on? So, anyway, anything else from anybody? Okay, we will reconvene next week. We're going to be doing stuff on the Kabbalah and other things, but it'll be different than last year. We're trying to, every class, make things different. So we will see you then. Have a great weekend. Watch out for the snow.
Thanks for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.